Hi everyone, this week's Parsha is Parshat Vayigash. And in this week's Parsha, it begins with a very heartfelt ask, a begging from Yehuda to Yosef to not kidnap Binyamin to Mitzrayim, to not keep him there, because it would break their father Yaakov's heart, and he couldn't afford losing his son Binyamin. So after this very heartfelt ask, begging from Yehuda to Yosef, Yosef finally reveals himself to the brothers as Yosef, the brother that they sold years ago, and he asks a question to them. He says, "Ha'od avicha, is my father still alive?" Now this begs the obvious question. The brothers have told Yosef several times already that his father is alive. So what's the purpose of Yosef's question here, asking them, is my father still alive? He knows the answer to this. So the Beis Halevi, who was a Soloveitchik, was essentially the start of the Soloveitchik rabbi dynasty years ago, and he commented on this, saying that Yosef's question here, asking if his father is still alive, wasn't really a question, a serious question. It was a rhetorical question. A question that was meant to rebuke the brothers for coming up with an excuse now to say, oh, if you take Binyamin, it's going to break our father's heart. By Yosef asking, oh, is my father still alive? He's essentially telling his brothers, where was that compassion? Where was that care for our father years ago when you decided to sell me into slavery to Egypt? Now, I think that we could learn a lot from this question from Yosef. One, I think it's a valuable lesson on the brothers' parts to be able, 20-something years later, to be able to right their wrongs, to find themselves in a similar situation in which they have to abandon one of their brothers, or they decide that maybe they're going to abandon one of their brothers, and here they decide not to because they consider their father in the equation, unlike what they did before. And on the other hand, there's a real lesson about consistency here, that a lot of the times we are able to make excuses for our actions to say, oh, this is a one-off, and I'll do X or I'll do Y, or for us to find ourselves doing something that we shouldn't be doing, but then saying, you know what, I already did it, so it's already too late. And we find ourselves in this pattern very often, just making these excuses. And what Yosef is really telling the brothers here is that making excuses to do the wrong thing is not something that's acceptable, right? We should always strive to be consistent in our actions. And if we're saying here that we're not going to sell our brother because it's going to break our father's heart, then we should have had that same consideration back when they decided to sell Yosef. So I think that these are just two very quick lessons that we could learn from this episode. But my bracha to everyone this week is that when we find ourselves in these situations in which we try making excuses for our actions, we could really think about it in a more serious way, saying, would this be something that I would apply across all standards, across all different situations, or is this just a one-off that I'm making an excuse for? And with that, I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom.